Welcome to Above the Canopy, your pulse on supply chain and logistics. Here we surface the research, the voices, and the perspectives that matter most.
I am so happy to have my friend and colleague from the University of Tennessee with me today, Darrell Edwards. Darrell, welcome to Above the Canopy, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today.
Thomas, thrilled to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. Always love to engage with supply chain colleagues. So yeah, happy to be here.
Great, and thank you. And I always tell people I always feel smarter when I come away from conversations with people who I really respect, and you are one of those people because you just well, the way you handle yourself, the way that you interacted with our students at the University of Tennessee, and most importantly, your experience in supply chain. And also, let me note that Darrell is the former COO of Lazy Boy, and I have been able to see how your former employees actually embraced you when they would come to our supply chain forum. So that tells me something right there.
Yeah, well, again, I'm thrilled to be here. And likewise, love working with you as well. Yeah. I tell everybody, Thomas, I made so many mistakes when I was in the supply chain space. Trust me, I can help you out. Listen to me. Don't do what I did.
Yeah. Well, and that shows right there that you're able to take that experience and move that forward. So let's jump into it. We've got a few questions here. And so I think one of the first ones that I really want to get your take on is, supply chains have moved from back office function now to boardroom priority. From your perspective, what's the most meaningful shift happening right now, and why does it matter at the leadership level?
Yeah, I think unfortunately COVID highlighted the absolute importance of the supply chain space within the business space, right? I mean, the COVID actually extenuated also. We spent many years, Thomas, developing these wonderfully well-oiled supply chains that were globalized, and we moved so many things from a domestic space, to maybe Asia, Southeast Asia, in the global space, and we spent really many years, say 20, 30, 40 years, getting them to be really synchronized. And we were very proud, right? We were capitalizing on, labor arbitrage in certain countries. We were capitalizing on the supply base in certain areas for certain specific supplies. So that was going wonderfully. And then something happened like a black swan event like COVID, which totally disrupted our supply chain. It exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. And as a result, think about it. We in the supply chain space still manage most of the capital within a business, from a manufacturing plants, our trucking systems, our lanes, our logistics there. In many cases, a lot of these heavy assets we manage, our talent, our people, reside within the supply chain. So in many cases, although we were seen as really good managers of capital per se, and the whole supply chain integration function, when we saw those vulnerabilities exposed, it kind of highlighted the need for the supply chain professional to be not just managers of capital and managers of assets, but to be, to have a seat at the table, that leadership table, the C-suite, as well as the boardroom in many cases, because there was so much of the downstream business impacts from sales perspective, from a revenue generation perspective, from a customer relationship vantage point, that the supply chain has amazing inputs in. We do that as a supply chain professional. Not everybody else did. And I think you saw, at least we have seen the shift from, transactional management to board level leadership within the supply chain.
And we're seeing that Darrell is very involved in the Global Supply Chain Institute at the University of Tennessee, where he helps lead sessions with some of the largest companies that are members of the GSCI. And I think that we're seeing more and more CEOs, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're seeing more of the C level now have a supply chain background. Would you agree with that?
100% agree. And again, it goes a lot largely to what we just described and talked about, because we have the ability to impact the things that most companies are most concerned about. Like if you're a public company, if you're trying to achieve consensus, is typically top line revenue and earnings per share, and we have the ability to favorably or unfavorably impact that. So so our importance again has moved really from the vantage point of, hey, we're transactionally based, to, hey, we're a leadership based organization that manages an amazing amount of assets. And oh, by the way, If we have a seat at the table and we can collaborate and we can communicate better with the sales and marketing teams, with the retail teams, with our C-suite executives from the, the human resources and the financial team, and ultimately our chief executive officers, I think then at that point we're able to take and create more value collectively as an organization.
Great. Thank you for that. And then let's follow on with, obviously, every day when we wake up, being in supply chain, there's something going on. So there's no shortage of noise in this market. And I always tell, you probably tell your students, I tell my students, tell everybody I know, and my wife keeps telling me, stop talking about supply chain. That if you want to get into an industry where you're never really bored and you're always solving problems and you like to solve puzzles, supply chain's it. So we know there's no shortage of noise in this market. But with that said, what signal do you believe leaders should be paying close or closer attention to?
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends. I mean, it depends on the size of your business, depends on who your target markets are, depends on where you're primarily focused from if you're a global business and you're looking, across the world at Asia and you're looking at Latin America, you're in Europe and the States, for example, then that's a different kind of signal to be monitored, set of signals to be monitoring. If you're mostly domestic, that's another different set of signals to be monitoring. But clearly, the world has become, I think, still going to remain globalized. It has become globalized. I think the world is increasingly more complex. And I also think it's increasingly more, I guess, dangerous from a risk standpoint from the global supply chain. So looking at signals, obviously I need to be looking at geopolitical signals from a standpoint of, and understand that we have kind of two different horizons. We have a short-term horizon, what things might be happening in the world today on the short term. For example, the conflicts that's happening in the Middle East is going to obviously affect crude oil pricing, which is obviously going to affect component parts that are crude oil or oil derivatives. So those are the kind of things I ought to be looking at from a signals short-term standpoint. I also ought to be looking at other signals like sustainability. What type of movements are going on? Are there things happening in, say, Europe from a sustainability movement? Typically is a leading indicator that it's ultimately going to find its way over here at the States if it's not there already. So I need to be thinking about government regulations. I need to be thinking about compliance. I need to be thinking about, do I have risk to mitigate there? The continued concerns from cybersecurity threats that we're all faced with. As the length of my supply chain, I continue to be more vulnerable from both cybersecurity as well as disruption from a multitude of things, from natural disasters, as we've talked about, geopolitical things, as well as, again, looking at it short term, what's happening in the world today that I'm going to be dealing with for the next, 90 to 120 days. And oh, by the way, what's happening today that I might be dealing with for the next 2 to 3 years? I need to look at those vulnerabilities. Am I at risk of being exposed somewhere? And if so, what kind of risk mitigation strategies might I put in place to minimize my disruptions? And remember, I don't have to be perfect. I just need to be better than my competitors if I win in the marketplace, right?
That's right. And keep that competitive edge, right? That's the key. So on top of that one, in today's environment, what is one decision supply chain leaders cannot afford to delay?
Oh yeah, this is, to me, it's an easy one. It's also kind of a basic one. Thomas, I tell a lot of people, my students as well as colleagues such as yourself, I tended, at least in my experience, I tended to find out that about 70% of my success is still attributed to how well I execute the basics excellently, kind of blocking and tackling, if you will. Yeah, I'm thrilled that we have tools coming on stream such as AI. I'm thrilled now that that's a new suite of tools that we can deploy in the supply chain space to create more value and to get better, faster, cheaper, easier. Love that. At the end of the day, though, I still need to be really good at blocking and tackling, or the fundamentals. And the most important fundamental for me is focusing on our people. When I say that, you say, well, Darrell, that's kind of simple. It's kind of basic. Yeah, it is. But I tell everybody, I mean, riddle me this, Thomas, why is it in similar markets, making or delivering similar products or services, the same companies that can build the same factories, hire the same consultants, buy the same machineries, machinery competing against each other, why is it some companies win and some companies lose? And we're the only variables of people, in my mind, in the leadership. So I tended to focus on that. So I say all that to say, in my mind, whether it's the next 90 days or the next 3 years, my advice is to heavily invest in talent and people. I mean, again, I love to use sports as a metaphor for business. I mean, most of the time, the teams that win the most games, the most championships, have the best coaches and the best talent on the field. I still kind of think that's the way it works in business too.
I would agree, and I think what's the saying? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I still think that uh, culture and people and investing in people and getting people to follow you and follow the direction of the company, where you're saying, hey, here's our North Star, here's where we're going. If you can do that, I think that's a massive competitive advantage too. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I tended to think,
No.
Thomas, the difference between, if I'm going to win the marketplace, I need to have engagement, hearts and minds. I need to have followership of my people. And to me, the difference between compliance and engagement is the difference between winning and losing. I can force you to comply. Thomas, if you do this, you can't work here. Thomas, if you don't do this, you can't work here. Okay,
Right.
and you'll give me compliance. And my opinion is I'm going to win the marketplace only when I get engagement. That's because you want to go beyond complying. You want to take in, you're bought in. And I think that difference is kind of what we're talking about, this people equation.
Yeah, I agree. And this next question, I think we just answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like when you look at a modern supply chain operating model that's working well, what makes that different? Like what makes that stand out compared to others that you've seen?
Yeah, and I'm going to build on that. I do think it's the people, and I've said that. But also, you said, well, Darrell, that's kind of a pretty ambiguous, pretty basic answer. And it is, but let's go a little bit deeper. If you have the right people that's asking the right questions, and I tended to, what I told the team I used to work with, guys and ladies, here's your mentor talking here, or here's somebody who's been there, done that, and learned the hard way in many cases. The higher in the organization you ascend to position wise, it's more and more about you doing less, but more and more about you asking the right questions of your team.
Mm.
If you ask the right questions, you'll find the solution. So when I say the people, it's the people that have the ability to connect with their team, has the experience or the ability to bring on, smart people and plug them in different places so they can ask the right questions of their team. If we need a new suite of tools, if we need to take and move in certain markets in the world, if we need to take and bolster, our increase our supply base because of certain vulnerabilities. If we those talented people that we're bringing in, that we're nurturing and we're growing both organically and from the outside, that have the tools and have the critical thinking skills to ask the right questions, I think help organizations to be better prepared, to make fewer mistakes, and to win more often in the marketplace. So it's the people, and it's that healthy blend. It's culture, it's people, it's intelligence, and it's those things combined. I think is a winning combination.
And then if we were to say, take that and layer on technology and again, go, and I think you will agree, we take technology, but then we look at it from a standpoint of change management
Mhm.
and talent. And if we have a plan around that, I think that gives us a competitive advantage as well. Would you agree?
100%. Yeah. And I love technology. I would tend to submit that technology is a tool, from my view at least, as a leader. I would say, much like a carpenter uses a hammer as a tool to take and to do his job well or her job well to have a finished product, we'll call it a house or a project. I think technology is a tool that enables a leader or a group of leaders to do their job well and to create more value. And 100% agree. I think you have to have people plugged in on your team to the latest technology, to the latest trends, seeing around the corner, if you will, something that might be coming around the corner so you're better prepared. Again, if you have the right team with the right skill sets to ask the right questions, I think they can better anticipate emerging trends, potential disruptions, and be in a position to seize on that or capitalize on that as well. Again, but you're right, technology is certainly one of those tools. If you combine all those attributes together, it's a winning team.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I know that you and Alan Amling, your colleague from our colleague from the University of Tennessee, did some research through the Advanced Supply Chain Collaborative, specifically on nearshoring or talent gaps, things like that. And I don't know the exact title, but if you would, I think you were talking a little bit about just the talent gap of what we're facing in regard if we were to bring manufacturing home. And then I think there might be a component of technology on that. But if you could expand on that, I think our viewers would love to hear about that.
Sure. And you did a really nice job of setting that up. So we've seen this bit of a paradigm shift. Again, I'm going to go back to after this black swan event, this terrible thing called COVID. We saw a lot of companies saying, hey, our supply chains have some vulnerabilities that are exposed. We have been all in at, maybe parts of our supply chain that reside in South America or reside in Southeast Asia or reside in or other parts of the world, and we're exposed. And so we want to consider looking at our supply chain, segmenting it, if you will. I'm going to have some sort of very transactional, commoditized supply chain components or parts or finished goods that I can leave in certain parts of the world and seize costs, capitalize on a low cost play. But guess what? I need to take a look at maybe some of my higher margin projects, some of my more customized, personalized type products, bring those either home domestically for a US centric company or near shore or fringe shore. Maybe it's in, Latin America, maybe in Mexico, close to home, but I still am able to enjoy some of, the economies of savings, but yet be close enough that I'm not across the ocean and I'm just across the border. And so with that, we've seen a lot of companies explore this phenomena of moving manufacturing home or close to home, as you said. We'll call it reshoring or nearshoring. And with that said, if that happens, or when that happens, if you will, what skills do we need? Do we have the adequate skills? Do we have enough of the adequate skills to take in and to staff those factories? And what we found out is not. We really don't. And you think, well, what kind of skills are we talking about, Darrell? We need more engineers. Well, yes. Do we need more, leaders and managers? Yes. But really, the skills gap we saw, in addition to the obvious ones, such as those kind of skills, right, were, hey, many years ago, as a country, for no judgment here, it just happens and happened. We kind of de-emphasized the trades and the skills
Mhm.
in the high schools. We said, hey, more people need college degrees because we're moving into this information age, and we need to be able to really synthesize information and make really high level decisions. So we want to focus more on a college curriculum as opposed to a trade skills curriculum. So we saw a lot of those trade skills vanish from high schools. Welders, machinists, electricians, brick masons, carpenters, et cetera, et cetera. And so now we're going to have to take and retool our trade schools, our high schools with some of these trade skills. And that doesn't happen overnight. So yes, if we start to bring manufacturing, when we start to bring manufacturing home or near home, we do think there's going to be a skills gap. In addition to this, here's the other piece that we found out. We used to know how to make stuff in this country. When we had manufacturing plants, in every small town in America making stuff, we had the ability, the skills, that tribal or that tacit knowledge, if you will, to make things. And when we moved all that offshore, again, I won't say forgot, but we no longer are training people to make stuff. So if you brought everything home, or brought more home, I should say. Now we not only have to have this gap to fill from a trade skill standpoint, but we have to understand how the production process works. We have to take and train people how to make things, how to become more skilled craftsmen and more artisan, as opposed to just how to, decipher information. So there's this, the understanding how to make things as well as all the trade skills. So those, interestingly enough, a lot of those are where the gaps reside. We still, may need more engineers. We may need more professionals, white collar jobs, but we know we're going to need more high skilled positions. And there's a gap.
I agree. And I think, in different industries, obviously, with the way that we have a labor shortage, you could say, okay, we'll put robots in.
Mhm.
But for certain manufacturing components, robots just are not going to be able to do that. Or if they do, the cost and everything's going to be an inhibitor. If I think back to, what we were talking about, Lazy Boy, right? Where you ran the show. And it was, I think back to that small town, Dayton, Tennessee, where they made the Lazy Boy products. Yeah, can you imagine bringing in a whole fleet of robots versus the labor that you had to build or use to build couches and recliners?
Yeah, I do think you make an excellent point, though, about automation, robotics, and machine type learning as well, that we see this in manufacturing. I tend to believe, at least my theory is, we're going to see a fair amount of manufacturing begin to move back home, either domestically or near domestically, either reshoring or nearshoring. I think in order to do that, it's going to be typically, in my opinion, some of your higher margin, more specialized products as opposed to more commodity type products. And it being a high margin type product or service, I think then we'll see labor augmented with robotics. So I think you're going to see, this evolution of, it won't be full on, a fully integrated technology robotic system. It will be kind of, you know, some technology dropped in, we'll call it in pods, if you will, of the manufacturing area. Maybe areas that are somewhat repetitive, areas maybe that are less safe than other areas, areas maybe that require more redundant, more less thinking skills, critical thinking skills. You'll see more of that kind of dropped in. We'll call it simple automation. I think then that simple automation will grow over time to more highly integrated automation, to a fully automated type facility, and that's maybe decades away. But I do think there's going to be an evolution of almost cobots, automation working with humans in collaboration as we bring stuff home. I think we can support it financially if we bring in some of our higher margin type products, bring those home, leave some of the low cost plays in other parts of the world, and that you'll see this kind of balanced scorecard approach, I believe, to manufacturing. So I think we're seeing kind of a bit of a paradigm shift, a redesign of our manufacturing or our global supply chain footprint because of the vulnerabilities that were exposed during COVID a few years ago.
You mentioned you said, I think you said the word metric there. So let me ask you this question, because you've at your level when you were a COO, you dealt with a board, and at the board level, and you're talking to lots of CEOs today still. What supply chain metrics are becoming more visible and more strategic now in companies that they're really trying to monitor?
Yeah, great question, Thomas. From my view, I still think probably, again, I go back to 70% is the blocking and tackling, right? We're still interested in inventory turns, cost of capital. We're still interested in the productivity of our manufacturing plants. We're still interested, in our service levels, whether it be, integrated business planning metrics, S&OP metrics. We're still interested in that. Still interested in things like, our obsolescence of certain products and all those standard metrics. I absolutely think that we're still talking about. So I go back 70% in my opinion. We're always going to be talking about the stuff that matters from, what drives the bottom line on the supply chain space side. However, with that being said, there's also, in my opinion, some new metrics emerging. So I think you see the latest supply chain leaders, or at least the supply chain leaders of the future, in my mind, are going to be fairly savvy in business and analytics, and they're going to be able to take the traditional supply chain knowledge and speak to the board about, emerging trends, and they're going to be able to use data to tell stories that maybe my generation didn't use as much. Additionally, I do believe if you're a large enough company, and maybe even some small companies, you'll remain globalized because the world can be your shopping cart, if you will, and you can go out and shop parts of the world for the best products, the best services, the lowest cost, to take and build your global supply chain framework to kind of seize the marketplace globally. With that said, if you are a globalized company, then we have threats. Cybersecurity threats I talked about a few minutes ago. We have geopolitical threats or concerns to talk about. So I think metrics that the board is going to be seeing or hearing from the supply chain professionals are things like, talk to me about, business continuity metrics around certain parts of the business that we're concerned about from a vulnerability standpoint. What kind of cybersecurity metrics do you have in place? What kind of, what percentage of your employees are trained at what level? Those kind of metrics I think we'll be talking about so that we can insulate ourselves from these attacks. I think we'll be talking about, where are we vulnerable within the supply chain? So talk to me about how have we reduced our vulnerabilities through increased suppliers in certain geographies of the world. And so those are the kind of things I believe, in addition to the standard metrics that supply chain professionals will be talking about with the board. And also, and I think every board is going to be asking this question. Every C-level executive that talks to analysts and or bankers are going to be talking about AI, of course.
Yeah.
And so, so in other words, talk to me about where we plugged in AI within the supply chain space. What percentage and how are we leveraging robotics or automation within the supply chain space, and I think you'll also be hearing more about that at the board. And probably lastly, and this kind of caught on even more so before I retired, But board levels and companies are still very interested in sustainability. And so they'll say, let's talk about our carbon footprint. Let's talk about being carbon neutral. Let's talk about green initiatives that we're deploying within our supply chain to reduce, strain on the planet, whether it be, technology within the energy space, technology within manufacturing to take and reduce the amount of, of energy required, all the, et cetera. How are we, improving the circular supply chain, all the waste, all the offall that's created through our supply chain in our manufacturing footprint, et cetera. Are we introducing that in the supply chain? Talk to me about metrics on, how many zero landfill plants do you have? What percentage of your products your offall that run through your plants are no longer going to landfills? What percentage is going to landfills? Those are top metrics I think supply chain professionals will be talking to the board about as well.
Great call out. And I'm glad you said that about sustainability because it's kind of fallen off. But I think a lot of leaders are still thinking about it because at the end of the day, if you can have a strategy that is right with your company specific, that should help take out costs. Because as one you just noted, if I'm using or pushing less weight or less waste to a landfill, there's a high probability then I've got less cost, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we should be looking at that.
No, 100%. I mean, absolutely. I'm reusing all the corrugated waste I had. I'm reusing all the plastic waste I had. I'm, all the wood, or in my case, we build furniture, right? Any kind of offall from wood, I'm reintroducing that. I'm using the sawdust maybe that's generated from my machines to take and burn for renewable energy. All those kind of things, I'm reintroducing in the supply chain, creating value. So I'm putting less strain on the planet, but equally, or maybe almost equally important is, guess what? It could be good for business too, because I can actually reduce my cost. Good for the planet, good for business. Hey, that's a win-win. And you just need to ask a better quality question. How do I accomplish both? How do I take and reduce my waste, reduce the strain on the planet while increasing the revenue or profitability for my company?
Yeah, and I think if you could think of it like that, then it doesn't get into a sensitive area of sustainability and depending on what year it is and who's for it or who's against it, if we look at it that way. So thank you for pointing that out. And then we'll follow up here and we're going to conclude. We cannot do these interviews now without talking specifically about AI. You mentioned it, so you opened the box, so I'm going there. So based on the conversations you've had with several business leaders and specifically with the Global Supply Chain Institute, with the advisory board and just others that I know that your network is great. There's hype and there's execution around AI and innovation right now. Where do you see the biggest disconnect between AI ambition and operational reality and deployment of AI?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe I give it justice for answering. Um, I said a few minutes ago, I think because it's the latest buzzword and we all almost feel compelled as business leaders to talk about it, either if you're a public company to the street, the analyst, if you're a private company, you're to your boards. And so because the potential is so immense and great, we as business leaders feel compelled to make sure that we're embracing it. So number one is, let's do AI for the sake of doing AI. Well, to me, that's a disconnect. I personally view AI as a tool, a business tool, just like I saw lean manufacturing, just like I see Six Sigma, just like I see, an ERP system that I deploy through my business as a tool to help me become, either, I say I'm a pretty simple-minded guy, either better, faster, cheaper, easier, better quality, better, better service, faster, right? Cheaper meaning lower cost, or easier meaning more convenient to the consumer. So I think if we can leverage AI as a tool as a business enabler to help us to do our jobs better. So I think there's a bit of a, let's do AI because we got to do AI versus how do I leverage the benefits of AI to help me achieve value in the marketplace? Number one, that's a disconnect. Number two is, I'm not sure, because we're almost force feeding AI to our business, I'm not sure that we as employees understand how to leverage its potential to the fullest extent. So another disconnect in my mind is, if we're going to give our employees tools and we want to take in and invest in these tools, then it would make business sense to me to make sure that we give them the training to use those tools really effectively and efficiently. And I'm not sure we're there yet. I think, go figure it out, Thomas. Here's this great tool, AI. We bought it because we want to be able to tell everybody we're using AI in this particular space. So go forth and learn, and you'll do it and you'll get there. But, maybe if we take and invest a little bit in training and in the technology, in this new tool we have, we'll be able to leverage its benefits better on the back end. So to me, those are a couple of disconnects.
I agree. And I think everybody I talk to is specific to, what's your plan with AI? Are you ready from a workforce standpoint, the impact, change management? And then, what are you trying to do with it, right? Are you able to measure and understand the value that, because you're putting money in, but then at the end of the day, it's really also, it reminds me of, you'll resonate with this, the .com era, when everybody got excited and said, oh, we've all got to get this technology and, and it's going to make us better. And then we implemented technology and we used bad processes and bad data and we got bad outputs. And I think that's going to be the same thing with AI. If you have a bad data foundational model, you're going to have a bad output. You're just automating something again.
You're automating bad stuff, right?
Right. And so it gets into that whole thing of, you've got to have a plan and you've got to have a strategy around it. And it's your business strategy. You can't let AI be your strategy. It has to be a component of your strategy. Would you agree?
100%. Again, I think it's go back again to me. I'm a pretty simple-minded guy. It's a tool, if I use this new tool I have really, really well, I'm going to have a better outcome versus, I've got this tool, I've got to use it just so I can say I'm using it somewhere. Okay, that's not the intent. And it goes back to me what you said a few minutes ago. What do you want me to do with it? I tended to ask myself this question every time we started any kind of initiative. What's the goal? It's a pretty simple question. What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And if you start out with that, it's pretty easy to work back here and to kind of build your strategy to achieve the goal, right? And so what's the goal and how do I use maybe AI as one of those tools to achieve the goal?
Perfect. Well, that's a great summary. And Darrell, I can't thank you enough for your time. Of course, I value your time and I want to make sure that I let you go and do the things that you need to do now because I know you're teaching classes and doing a lot of other things. So again, thank you for joining me on Above the Canopy. And I know that our listeners and our viewers are going to enjoy this conversation. So, my friend, thank you so much, and I'll see you on campus.
See you, Thomas. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Above the Canopy, market-ready signals for the modern leader. Learn more about how to stay ahead at redwoodlogistics.com.